This is a celebratory night, and it's a night that's happening during a very heavy time in the world. I can tell you that this speech will not have the perfect words to make sense of or even ease the deep pain and fear and despair that so many people are feeling, not just in Gaza and in Israel, but across Canada and no doubt in this very room. What I will do is honor those working for peace, for Palestinian and Israeli women who have, among them, worked for decades to reject hate, to avoid the devastating horrors of war and the suffering of innocent people. And so many of you in this room have dedicated your lives to this work too. And here tonight are so many of you who were both nominated for this award and won it previously and equally deserving of being on this stage. Now, past award winners have been so accomplished and so distinguished that perhaps many of you are wondering for the first time, what does this recipient actually do? What is an ambassador for women, peace, and security? Or maybe you're wondering, as a nice gentleman on Twitter posted soon after my appointment, how did Canada get stuck with this budget Tina Fey? I took it as a compliment. So these are all fair questions. In reverse order, I'll say that there has never been a big aha moment for me that explains how I ended up so deep in this work. For a little context, and my mom can verify this is true, when I was in grade 2, so about 7 years old, French immersion schools across Alberta had a speech competition. About 90% of the kids gave some variation of Pourquoi j'aime Wayne Gretzky. Edmonton in the 80s, right? It was City of Champions. I gave my speech on why the world needs more women in politics. In 2005, I did have a very focusing experience in Sudan. Thanks to Romeo Dallaire, for whom I was doing research on child soldiers, I had a job working 3 days a week at the UN Peacekeeping Mission and 3 days a week at AFAD, which is Khartoum's only all-women's university. The war between North and South Sudan had just ended through a peace agreement, and UN officials were working on a transitional government, an interim constitution, and how to deal with really bloated security forces across the country. And at the university, women experts were working every day on the very same things. But the two groups were like ships passing in the night. They were missing out on each other's knowledge and access, and I felt like I could help close that gap. It was Sudanese women who really were the first to show me women, peace, and security. I only learned later about the actual concept and how it came to be. So very briefly, I'll tell you that for thousands of years, women in every part of the world have played key roles with respect to war and to peace, including on this land, where Indigenous women have long traditions of mediating between warring groups and preventing conflicts over resources. About 30 years ago, women came together from a whole range of countries experiencing war, so from Bosnia, from Guatemala, the Philippines, Colombia, and more. And they found that even though they came from very different cultures, they had very similar experiences. So during the conflict, they delivered essential services. They fought as combatants. They led revolutions. They helped end wars, and they mediated or got partners and parties to negotiate in tables. But when it came time for formal processes to set the terms of a peace agreement and to rebuild, they were almost wholly shut out. So they organized for about 5 years, and they finally went to the UN Security Council to pass a resolution, revolutionary at the time, saying that women are not only victims of conflict, but they are essential decision makers. And the term women, peace, and security was born. So before we go further on what it is, I want to talk for a second about what it's not. It's not the idea that women are inherently more peaceful than men. It's not the idea of women versus men. It's not about hard power versus soft power, because we both know that men and women can deliver both. And it's not about saying all women are the same or all men are the same. So what actually is this women, peace, and security? It's the idea that diverse groups make better decisions. It's that women from various backgrounds and identities not only have a right to influence decisions that affect our lives, but when we do, the outcomes are better. And research bears this out in the private sector, on boards, and with respect to peace agreements. They're 35% more likely to endure at least 15 years when women participate meaningfully in their creation. And a brief story to highlight some of the reasons why. Again, on Sudan. So several years ago, there were peace talks in Darfur, or on Darfur, between the government of Sudan and a bunch of rebel movements. So the leaders of most of these rebel movements were living in exile in Europe. The UN flew them to Nigeria for negotiations. And a Canadian senator, Mobina Jaffer, who was our special envoy at the time, said, if we can pick up these warlords, surely we can bring some women to the talks. So she arranged for about a dozen Darfuri women, most of whom were living in internally displaced persons camps at the time, to be there as well. Because they weren't armed actors, they didn't have a seat at the negotiating tables. So they were outside the room as technical advisors. So at one point, the parties came out of the room, everyone frustrated because they were at an impasse. They were deadlocked. And as people were getting coffee, figuring out their next steps, someone said to the women, the talks broke down because no one could agree on who would control this certain river. And there's a big map in the background, and everyone's looking at the map, and the women said, that river, that's the one that they can't agree on. Yep, that's the one that they're deadlocked over. Yep, that's the river. And one of the women said, that river dried up 3 years ago. She knew this because in Darfur, women are responsible for water collection. Again, it's not saying they're better, they're more peaceful, et cetera. It just takes a range of knowledge. Women, peace, and security is also the idea that true operational effectiveness comes when we reduce blind spots in our situational awareness. When field commanders get more comprehensive pictures of local populations' needs and interests, when we can better anticipate migration patterns and behaviors of combatants and non-combatants, when we understand triggers for violence, and so much more. Ultimately, it's about winning the war and winning the peace. And there is no security issue to which all of this does not apply. So take artificial intelligence, where algorithms amplify gender and often racial biases throughout machine learning cycles. These can be inadvertently transferred to even military AI operations. Take great power competition and the use of disinformation campaigns by adversaries to set conditions for kinetic actions. A few weeks ago at NATO, Ukraine's Strategic Command said gender disinformation is the most underestimated threat of Russian aggression in Ukraine. Take even natural disasters, and this one's one of my favorite examples. There's research showing that when a storm is given a woman's name, people are less likely to listen to calls from authorities to evacuate. They've even done trials testing the name of Alexander versus Alexandra. The amazing point to me on this one is that because people tend to take storms named after women less seriously, they end up, on average, being even more deadly. So at a time of great divisions, realignments, and a changing world order, this area, this field, this concept of women, peace, and security is a remarkable source of partnerships and really genuine collaboration. It's an area where we can cooperate outside traditional alliances and partnerships and build trust in vital relationships. I sometimes hear people saying the last thing anyone wants is for Canada to go around lecturing people on women or gender. And I couldn't agree more. If someone is lecturing, they're doing this the wrong way. In this amazing job of mine, I get to see so many people really exchanging with respect. I see Canadian diplomats. I see members of the Canadian Armed Forces. General Eyre and General Allen lead among them, doing this beautifully, all the time in every part of the world. And some of the best insights come from beyond our usual circles. So Bangladesh can teach us about women in early warning systems for storms and floods. Colombia, only example in the world with 50-50 women negotiators at 50-50 women and men negotiators at peace talks. Indonesia set up networks of support for women peacekeepers. Singapore talks about targeted cyber violence. The list goes on. There's much to learn, and there is also so much that Canada has to offer. We've been using gender-based analysis plus as a government for over 25 years. I know everyone loves gender-based analysis plus. I genuinely believe it is a national treasure. As is our experience integrating women into trades across the armed forces, as is half the fact that right now, half of Canadian ambassadors are women, as are the constructive relationships that the government has built with civil society networks in Canada, organizations of women veterans, and more. I cannot tell you the level of interest that I experience, that I hear from militaries, from police, and for governments around the world. And I also cannot convey strongly enough what a source of strength it is for Canada when we talk in a forthright way and with humility about our challenges and how we're dealing with them. There is strength, not weakness, in talking about why culture change has to be a priority. There is strength, not weakness, in acknowledging, addressing, and apologizing for the LGBTQ purge, the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, Hader Beatty, and much more. And there's strength, not weakness, in saying that none of this is easy, that we still have progress to make, but that dealing with this is what leadership looks like. Right now, there are a lot of institutions that are simply not even trying. They're not trying to do the hard work that earns legitimacy and excellence. Authoritarianism is on the march. We have an epidemic of coups around the world. We're seeing a reversal of generational gains in women's rights and growing attacks on those who are defending them. I'm often asked why this pushback is occurring. If the benefits are so evident, so substantiated, why this resistance? I think there are many reasons. For some, it's the challenge of change. As the saying goes, when you're used to privilege, equality feels like discrimination. For those who are embracing authoritarianism, it's a fear, I think, of being held accountable by their own people. They don't want to share power, be more transparent, or open up systems. Some, like Russia, are using women's rights and gender equality as a tactic to divide traditional alliances. Russia's even stepped up its messaging that this is a, quote, Western notion. It's by the West and for the rest. We need to call that out as a lie. We also need to call out how deeply offensive that assertion is to women in every part of this planet who has risked and often lost their lives trying to realize their rights and live in peace and with dignity. So this year's Vimy Award may have my name on it, but it belongs to them. I am enormously grateful to the Women, Peace and Security Network of Canada for nominating me, for all of you here tonight, and for all that you do in your self-described role as the government's, quote, critical friend, including for women service members and women veterans. I'm really overwhelmed by the letters of support that dozens of men and women working on the front lines of conflict and crisis have sent in. It's been my life's honor to work with all of them. You are my teachers, and thank you. I want to thank one woman in particular who had tried to be here today but had a travel issue at the airport in New York this morning, and that's Kenya's Alice Nderitu, a dear and lifelong friend of mine. Before becoming the UN Secretary General's Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, Alice was a conflict mediator. And as just one example, she negotiated a successful peace process involving 56 ethnic communities in Nigeria. I am grateful to the many, many, many people working across our government, at my home Department of Global Affairs, at National Defense, in the Canadian Armed Forces, in the RCMP, and beyond, who advance this work in really thousands of different ways. I am fueled every day by the energy, wisdom, hard work, and very good humor of my own team, represented by my Chief of Staff, Mary Pierre Wade, and Lieutenant Colonel Melanie Lake. And I am grateful for my family. My dad, Jack, died less than 2 months ago and would have loved tonight. My mom, Mary, hi Mom, for whom the term role model doesn't even begin to cover your impacts on me or on this world. My brother Tim, who used to be extremely annoying, but I must admit actually turned out pretty well. And to my husband, Peter Dimitrov, himself a gunner, who I know is extremely happy to be sitting in this room tonight. Young people sometimes ask me for career advice, and the thing I always make sure to say is that you don't have to have a spouse or a life partner, but if you do, be darn sure that you pick one who celebrates your successes as if they were their own. So if you take away nothing from me tonight, please let it be that this concept of women, peace, and security is not ideological or partisan, it's not adversarial, and it's not zero-sum. And it's not someone else's work. It's everyone, and it's ours. Merci, miigwech. Thank you.